Well, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 37 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the Chuck Norris to the roundhouse kick to the face, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
What a classic, Daniel. Old Chuck Norris. Did you ever get into the Chuck Norris jokes?
Oh, I went hard into the Chuck Norris
When
jokes.
Chuck Norris does a push-up, he doesn't push himself up, he pushes the world down.
The thing is, though, I'm not convinced those are jokes. I treat that as historical fact.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, I read that in a history book, I think.
But not only is it just the two of us, but we're excited to add a little bit of class, a little bit of wisdom to this podcast.
Fine.
Go from a dynamic duo to a holy trinity of movie knowledge, and be joined by a very special guest today. And that is Mr. Unix Diza. He is an assistant principal at the Tree of Life School in Columbus, Ohio, a movie buff, and someone who has, for at least the last several years, been teaching a gospel and film elective at that school. And all of that, on top of all that, the cherry on top is he's just an all-around good guy. Hey, welcome so much. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode.
Hey, Daniel, Sam, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so sort of the background to our relationship that I don't know if your standards are just low. I would think you'd mostly have higher standards than this, but you've actually pulled me in for a couple classes, electives of that film class, just to share digitally with your students. So I've kind of had a front row digital seat, at least, to kind of see you in action, with the students and teaching that class.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I couldn't get your co-host. He would have been my first preference. So I suppose
Yeah.
I have to settle for,
You take what you can get sometimes. And I just, hopefully you had good counselor standing by for immediately following Daniel's appearance in those classes, just to deal with any of the trauma that the kids might have experienced having to listen to this guy.
Yeah, he brought me in for the teaching, and the following class is the unteaching.
Yeah,
to undo the damage I have done. But yeah, it's been fun. I love doing stuff like that. And kind of as I was coming into those classes, kind of seeing and hearing from your heart, like the stuff you're doing with the class, I just the epiphany, the light bulb came on my head, and just thought, like, hey, this guy is a guy that's doing a lot of neat stuff. In some ways, you're doing like in the field the stuff that we've talked about before. Just, hey, how as Christians do we equip, people to think critically about movies? How do you sort of engage the next generation to not just be passive consumers of media, but to actually, think critically, engage, contribute to that? So I wanted to bring you in and just pick your brain about, some of the stuff that you're doing, some of the lessons you've learned and things you've seen that resonate with your students. But before we get there, I thought let's start a little bit, get to know you a little bit, and just sort of your background, as someone that obviously loves movies, to the point that you are teaching a class on movies. And kind of how did that like love of film and cinema, how did that like begin for you? And like maybe if you remember, like, do you remember the first movie that you like saw in a movie theater?
Sure, yeah, I do, but it must not have been that great. But here, I remember distinctly going to a movie theater. I think it was Jungle Book 2. With my mom and my dad, and I remember being so excited because I got the official movie poster for that movie. But if you were to ask me anything about the plot line or treasured memories of that film, I have nothing to share. So that one must have been a bit of a dud. But really, Daniel, the kind of inspiration or kind of the reason why I've come to love movies so much is kind of twofold. Number one, like, it's just part and parcel of how I was raised. Like, with a lot of it has to go back to my dad and kind of how we were raised as a family. So it was just me, my mom, my dad, and I have a younger brother. And we're just really tight knit, really close. And we spent a lot of time going to the library and picking out different movies. But also, it was my dad that introduced us to a very amazing cable channel called TCM, Turner Classic Movies. So I'm a bit of an old soul when it comes to movies. So my, I guess, core memory as far as movie goes is the movie Singing in the Rain, classic film back in 1952 as Gene Kelly and Debbie Reynolds and Donald O'Connor. But I remember vividly, it was, I was living in Florida at the time with my family. I can just picture it. We were in an apartment. It was on one of those tube televisions. And there's a number in there that Donald O'Connor does called "Make 'Em Laugh." Absolutely hilarious number. But I just remember it's me, my immediate family, and my aunt who's visiting. And we had popcorn, and I just remember laughing so much that my insides hurt. But that's kind of like so classic film. My dad, my family, and then we just really enjoyed discussing movies as well. So that's kind of a little bit about why movies have a special place in my heart.
Yeah, I do love that you mentioned that you get movies from the library. I feel like libraries don't get enough credit for
Totally.
the goods. We're very pro library on this podcast, but it is cool. Like it is like I'm similar with like just the way that movies can like instantly bring you back to like specific. I remember, even now I'll see like the poster of a movie, and I can remember watching that with my brother in our basement, like what the room was like, the TV, and like even like the conversations we kind of have around that, and like, just the way it sinks into just us on like a more like nostalgic level. You mentioned Jungle Book 2, which I'll be honest, I did not know there were two. I thought the book was closed after Jungle Book 1, but apparently they kept going. You mentioned that's not wasn't necessarily an instant beloved classic. Do you have like an all time favorite?
I do. I do. And I had toyed with sharing this for your guys's, very renowned last segment, but I decided to go a different route. So yeah, no, this is a great opportunity. So I have to say, for me, my favorite movie of all time is the 1942 Best Picture classic Casablanca, which I think a lot of people in the greater film community. Many people would say that, and there are many things I can go into. I will not rehash it because I'm not a super expert on cinematography or anything, but I think the work that Michael Curtiz did as a director is exceptional. And with what he did with the shading and the lighting, I thought the acting was great. But for me, it really is. Is before I became an assistant principal. You should know that I taught middle school and high school social studies and history growing up. So history is also a big love and passion of mine. And so Casablanca is set in World War II, right? But there's the movie's just such a perfect blend of all the things I enjoy about a movie. It's got a perfect balance of drama, but then it's got comedy, it's got romance, and it does it in a way that isn't cheesy. And I mean, that's why things are instant classics, at least I think, things that stand the test of time because there are timeless things embedded within the movie. So that's just a little bit about it. I could, of course, go into it more. But yeah, Casablanca for sure.
Have you seen
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I remember me and my wife,
It's a classic.
yeah, a couple of years ago, right before we had kids, we were gonna like watch through like the AFI top 100 films and catch up. We got through Godfather and Casablanca, and then and I think one other, I forget, an African, people sailing down the African River. I forget what the movie's called.
African
Yeah,
Queen.
African Queen.
Yeah, maybe that one.
Yeah.
We got through those ones, and then we had kids, and we're stuck at three, so we still have the other 997 ones left. Maybe last kind of question just for you personally, then before we get into just sort of the cool things you're doing with your class and at your school. But just like as a Christian, are there any films that you can think of that, whether it's like a Christian movie or not, that influenced you most, just as far as like how you watch movies and like understand cinema as a Christian?
Yeah, absolutely. So, no, that's a really great question. And I think one of the things I love about getting to kind of share my story, share my passion for film and thinking deeply about it, is I get to honor those that have kind of contributed to me getting to this point. Like I didn't just like automatically love thinking deeply about movies. So honoring my parents and my family and my upbringing is important. But then also my wife and my in-laws kind of also when I grew up as an adult, speaking deeply into it. So I got permission from my wife to share this story. Just to be able to speak to that. Um, but just as a big preface, I would say about 4 days into our marriage. So we just gotten married 4 days in. We were driving in Tennessee. We were down there for our honeymoon, and we came to an epiphany that we both watch movies for different reasons. So before I became this deep, sage, wise individual on movies, I actually enjoyed movies as a form of escape. I enjoyed going to movies. When I sat down for a movie, I wanted to laugh. I didn't want to have to think too deeply about it. Otherwise, my brain would hurt. And she was actually quite the opposite. So the films that she brought into our marriage were films like The Village or Christopher Nolan's Inception. And she likes movies that get you to think deeply, and then having a discussion off of that. So that was something we had to work through. We joke that we're still in a little bit of counseling over that, but I share all that to kind of get to the point where everything that I do with my film class or different things, my wife is like a teammate in that process. We watch the movies together, we discuss. So a lot of the good that I'm able to share with you is a result of like the blessing that she is to me. But to answer your question about a specific movie, when I was talking with her, I was prepping to create my first iteration of a film class, and I was like, you know what, it'd be great if I could find a movie that would be very easy for kids to pick up on the idea that there are, gospel echoes of gospel themes in film. I was like, what do you think? And she told me, my wife did, that her older sister trained them how to do something similar to that on the movie Man of Steel. Right, 2013 classic with Zack Snyder that he did. So she told me that was the movie that they used as kind of a springboard for discussion about thinking deeply on film. So then we watched that together. And then from there, that kind of is one of the kind of inspirations, the impetus, so to speak, for making my film class. So Man of Steel. Not my favorite superhero movie, but is the correct answer to the question that you asked.
So basically what you're saying is that Zack Snyder taught you how to watch movies as a Christian. I feel like we need to put that in. Yeah. Which is funny because I think he was just viral. I don't know if either you saw the other day, he has like a mythology show, animated show, and he went viral for there's a scene in that show where I think like Thor or Odin or whatever the Northman has this vision of the future, and it's of Jesus and people worshiping him rather than the old gods. And say what you will about Zack Snyder, but he's always had very deep religious themes and stuff in all of his stories, kind of beneath all the spectacle and slow-mo. You sort of touched on it a little bit already, but kind of to transition, why should Christians care about movies? You sort of shared, what helped you to think deeper about movies. But what would you say to someone like Sam here that, he lives atop the holy mountain and, it's like, hey, you could watch movies, but he wants to go with his Bible and prayer and fasting and focus on the needy, the orphans, the widows, rather than wasting it. Why should Christians, care about something seemingly as trivial, at least according to some, as like cinema?
Well, yeah, no, I love that you asked that question because I had the privilege of kind of sharing a little bit about what I do with my church. We have a men's conference every year, and sometimes they invite different guys to do breakout sessions. And they said, "Hey, would you want to do a breakout session?" And I said, "Yeah, only if I can talk about what I do with my film class, because I do think it's important for Christians to think deeply about movies and to care about what's going on in film because." If all truth is God's truth, right? Daniel, when I first interacted with the Collision and Faith and Pop Culture podcast, one of the things I appreciate about the stuff that you've written in the past and still doing is that you did one great article about, no such thing as a sacred secular divide. And I believe that for sure. I believe that's biblical. But if that's the case, and if truth is revealed in stories, then truth is certainly revealed in film as well. And then what I shared with my church is that because truth is revealed in film, then film is not only something that we can enjoy as a family thing, pop some popcorn and just make it like a tradition, like a family movie night thing, but it's also something you can use as a springboard to then discuss with other people. And there may even be individuals that you can have conversations with that can tend towards spiritual things that may never even want to darken the doors of a church, so to speak. It just has incredible potential because people love talking about movies. That's kind of why we're here right now talking about it. So,
yeah, and I think there's the power of story. There's a reason why Jesus came and in his short ministry just walked around telling a ton of stories that were so impactful that we still, even at people outside of the church know what the Good Samaritan is, or some of the stories that he told, because they do stick with us. So that's great. Kind of, and like the way obviously you believe that, you're convicted by that to the point that you are actively doing that and helping students. Maybe share a little bit, just like, how did this kind of gospel and film class at your school, like, how did that come? Like, how does a guy fall into teaching about films at school? I wish I had known that was an option back in the day, so I could have followed that career path. But how do you kind of fall into that? And maybe a second part to that is like, was there any like resistance? Like, I know you don't want to throw anyone under the bus or anything, but did anyone like ask genuine questions of like, well, maybe we shouldn't do this, or parents that were curious? But kind of how did all that get started?
Yeah, for sure. Um, well, I guess the initial gut reaction or answer is when you're in administration, you have a certain amount of leeway to do what you want. So, I mean, I told you my background was teaching. I love teaching, and I feel that my decisions as a leader are informed by still remaining connected to what the experiences of my teachers are. So, part of the reason was, and I guess one of the sort of things that I said, like, I will move into administration if I can still teach a class, and if I get to choose what that class is, and I pitched it. But if I could just go back real quick, because what you said prior to the setup for this question made me think of there's C.S. Lewis wrote an essay. It's called "Myth Became Fact," and I love this quote that I pulled from it. And I think it speaks to kind of the importance of caring about movies for believers, but then also kind of this inspiration for then, all right, so why focus on a gospel and movies class where you're watching film and trying to find gospel connections to it. But if I could just read it real quick, it's just short. He said, C.S. Lewis wrote, "We must not be ashamed of the mythical radiance resting on our theology. We must not be nervous about parallels and pagan Christs. They ought to be there. It would be a stumbling block if they weren't." And I think that really speaks to the fact that humans are made in God's image, right? And human beings as image bearers will reflect their creator, whether they acknowledge him or not. So I think that, I mean, that Tolkien does a lot of stuff on human beings as sub creators and all how that relates to myth and different things like that. So I just wanted to circle back and kind of maybe close the loop on that question. But with regards to starting a gospel and film class, as much as it would probably boost your viewership and clicks, like I have no like juicy stories about great battles I waged in order to say that this class is valuable. We must do it. I've actually been blessed. Like this film class I'm doing that Daniel, you've been able to be a part of, is actually the second iteration of a film class. I've done it once before at a completely different school. So in two schools now where I've done two different film classes, everyone's been very supportive. Like when I pitched them the idea, everyone was like, yeah, let's see how they can make it happen, and have been very, very encouraging. There'll be jokes every now and again, like, we study these subjects, and what do you do in your class? You watch movies, but it's all in playful banter. It's never any sort of any negative connotations or anything like that.
We, in some ways, like my wife's an art teacher, and Sam's sister is an art teacher, middle school, high school at the same school. So I mean, they hear some of those. Even I'll poke her a little bit about you just color pictures that. But I think it is, especially when you really dig into Scripture and just realize how much emphasis that God, I mean, both in the message of the Bible and like the medium of the Bible as a work of art, a work of literature, just how much importance He put on things like stories and beauty and just aesthetics in the way that kind of pulls us towards Him and worship. I think as Christians, we, if any school out there should have a film class or, a culture class, it should be a Christian school. It should be people that are kind of grounded in, the truth of the Bible. As far as sort of your class, like I know a couple of them because I was in your class for, what were the movie? A Quiet Place, Lord of the Rings, obviously, as anyone that listens to this podcast knows, that's my jam. And then Inside Out 2, which I dressed up as Inside Out 2 for Halloween. So three good ones.
Yeah, you showed a picture of Inside Out 2, but we discussed the first movie. So
yeah.
yeah.
But like, how did you? I think I remember. I think Man of Steel was on there. like how did you go about like because you only have so much time you can only watch so many movies in a semester. Like what were sort of the things that you looked at as far as like, hey, this would be a good movie, or this would represent this? Like, was there any method to the madness, or was it just, hey, I got a chance, I'm the boss, I can talk about this movie and it's awesome, so I'm going to do it?
Yeah. So thankfully there was a little bit of method to the madness, but I just had to. So I appreciate, for all you listeners out there, the blessing of being a guest is that you get some of these questions in advance, so you have a little chance to, prepackage your thoughts a little bit. So, in thinking back on it, uh, part of the films that I'm doing in this current version is because in the first iteration of my film class, I called it Life Lessons from Film. It really was just kind of like a catch-all where we were watching movies and then we were pulling and learning different lessons from it. So like we watched the movie Thor and we talked about servant leadership, or we watched the movie 12 Angry Men and we talked about justice and prejudice, and like different things like that. Um, and so I coming out of that, moving to a new school, and then getting to be able to do it again, the real reason why I kind of shifted and kind of narrowed my focus to just like one thing, like gospel and movies, was I got a book for Christmas from my mother-in-law, and it was a book. It's called Hollywood Heroes: How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. It's written by Dr. Frank Turek, who he co-wrote it with his son, and they basically just kind of unpack DC, Marvel, Harry Potter. Maybe that's a little controversial. I don't know, but different films like that, and then how you can use that from an apologetic standpoint, but then also kind of there's discussion questions after every chapter. It's a good read, and that book kind of formed a little bit of a foundation in terms of the films that I've included. Although based on student feedback, trying to balance it out with a lot of different genres. So like one of the main pieces of feedback I've gotten from students is, I mean, I think everyone's feeling kind of the oversaturation of superhero films. So just trying to demonstrate, like, if it's not a gospel and superhero film class, it's a gospel and movies class. So trying to represent that. So trying to switch up the genres with like having you join us for A Quiet Place, or Inside Out, or we did Murder on the Orient Express, and recently we just finished watching Arrival. We actually just, as we're sitting here and talking about it, we just finished discussing it in class today. So like just trying to switch it up on the genres and just showing kids that like there's a lot of great things you can pull from movies. It's not just superhero movies, right? It's not just the hero's journey. It's not just those sorts of things. There are other things you can pull as well.
Yeah, because it seems like people do like fall back on the superhero. I mean, even the book you quote, I mean, it's the cover of it. It's like a Superman-esque character that I think because superheroes are just in many ways the easiest examples of like, they exist. I mean, you have moral gray, you have Batman and some of that, but like they exist to sort of make sacrifices on behalf, they are like sort of these Christ figures by definition. But yeah, because I remember just seeing the list of, horror movies or action movies or dramas or science, sci-fi movies, and this sort of, any story that's being told, you can dig into that. I mean, even as someone that reviews movies every week, seeing all kind of, even movies I would never go see on my own, and just seeing how much of that is filtered in there. This isn't, I'm going to put you on the spot because I didn't tell you in advance, but is there any movie that you wish you could show, like, but either just because it's kids or just because you don't want to overlap, or like, is there like any movie that just stands out? Like, hey, this would be a great one to, to dig into, but maybe it's a bit more challenging for just, an introduction,
Yeah,
for teenagers.
I'm sure there probably has been, but right now, it's just not coming to me. I mean, there's a lot of different things, like, so just the nature of the beast of teaching at a Christian school. So we, because of our community and like the varied perspectives in terms of discernment in film. So we put filters on, right, either through VidAngel or ClearPlay, to kind of filter out the profanity and some of the explicit scenes. But other than that, so I suppose a film that would probably get a little bit too choppy if you were to kind of apply that sort of a thing. So there are some things that we probably like steer away from. But right now, like I know there have been some where it'd be like, it'd be great if we could do this, but there are just some logistical things but I can't think of one off the top of
Yeah,
my
because even like maybe like a Scorsese film or something like a religious guy that is not making movies for the average lay person in church audience, just a bit more difficult to get into. What have you learned just from the experience? You said you've been doing it from two different schools. I don't know how many years you've been doing it total in those schools, but like what sort of adjustments have you made, or has there been anything that you've tried and been like, oh, that's not the way to do it. I need to change, or else something that you did do that you didn't think would really resonate, that maybe like, well, like kids really got into this. This really speaks, that stirs something within their hearts. I need to lean more into this. Like, what are just some lessons that you've learned kind of along the way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, well, here, I'll just kind of explain just a little bit of the nuts and bolts of what we do, just to kind of maybe provide some context of my response to this question. So, really, um, the bulk of our classes obviously spent time watching the movies, but in order to actively engage students' minds, what we do is I give kids, it's a piece of paper, and on the paper, the way I've kind of tried to approach the class, just so gospel and movies classes, I give them a summary of the gospel at the beginning of the film. So we try to talk about what is the gospel, try to understand it. That's goal number one, and I give them a framework. So I borrowed this from my pastor, who borrowed it from his pastor, and so on and so forth. Right, as you're citing different sources, but the framework is: God is holy, I am not. Jesus saves, and Christ is my life. And basically, the piece of paper is kind of broken down into those four categories or columns, if you will. And then what I've been trying to train students to do is, hey, over the course of the semester, because it's a semester class, you know, we'll try to look for these sorts of things. So we practice with Man of Steel. And then as we go throughout the semester, there's also a rhythm that we have. Sometimes I may give some reading assignments. So sometimes I may say, this cool guy, Daniel, he wrote this article on the hero's journey.
I've heard those are the highlights of your class. People are saying that.
Right. So giving reading assignments, but then I really try to make it kind of student centered, student driven. So the way it works is like, here's a reading. All right, you take it home, you read it, kind of structured like a college class, and then you come to class the next day with a couple questions you want to talk about, and then you guys talk about it in your groups, and I'll move from group to listen in, or sometimes to give them a break from small groups, because not every kid loves small groups. Sometimes we'll like get to the end of the movie, and I'll say, all right, it's an in-class writing day. Tell me what you saw in this film. Where are the echoes of the gospel you saw in this movie? Or like today, because we finished Arrival, they were doing a reflection video. So like they had to kind of like, I'm doing here, they had to like talk and orally explain, hey, this is what I saw. These are things I was confused about, things like that, as we were going. So though I share that generic structure and framework, because anything that I learn as I interact with students, and the way I try to tailor the film, is I'm trying to balance catering to their interests, and then also trying to bring up important things that I think is worthwhile to share with them before we send them off into our world, into our culture. So it's really just trying to walk that balance out well there. But I already shared with you that people are like, not too many superhero movies, or an interesting thing. And Daniel, don't fall out of your seat for this one, but maybe you wouldn't be shocked at this, but anytime I share Lord of the Rings with my students, 90% of them, I would say, have not seen the movie. So
We have so much work still to do with this upcoming generation.
I mean,
So
why do you think I reached out to you in the first place? So, I mean, but I think really it's things like that, and trying to tweak, and trying to basically, well, here's a neat thing that we do. At the end of the semester, we have a project where basically the project is for kids to pick a movie, with approval, of course, that they think would be a good fit for the class. And then they put together a presentation, and they basically walk through the entire process that we've done as a class. They watch it, they note down different things of the gospel they see in it, and then they're in charge of trying to create, hey, what question would he ask other classmates to write about? What article should be assigned as a reading for this? So they're putting together a case for this movie should be considered to be added to this class. and then they record themselves giving their presentation and making their case. And I only require them to talk for about 5 minutes, but consistently I've been getting, and I mean, this is the joy of teaching. We don't always get to see the results so clearly, but like I've consistently watched like 10, 15, 20, 25-minute videos where kids, my students always tell me, I tried not to go super long, but as I started talking about it, I just couldn't help but, keep talking and engaging. And sometimes they just get lost in it as they're analyzing. And as you're talking and engaging your mind, you're really reflecting and you're really demonstrating what you learn. So that's been something really cool. And I even have a couple student, I don't know, testimonials or quotes. There's one in particular I'd love to share, if there's space to do it, just to kind of give a picture of, from a student perspective, what
Yeah,
they
for sure.
take away from the class. So
Yeah, let's hear it.
okay, so it's a bit lengthy, but this is the best one. I'll just pick one out of a handful. So this student, from last year wrote, I have come to see more of what you have meant in saying that the story of the Creator is reflected in all of his creation. Earlier on, I certainly had some notable resistance to this notion, but I now see really what the intent is. It's not that there is some special organization that secretly puts the gospel in every movie that exists, or even that you're saying all of them do reflect the story perfectly if we but squint and turn our heads just right. The point is to foster a heart and a mind that intends upon seeing God or things of Him everywhere we can. Eyes that look for what could be edifying to our understanding of Christ's sacrifice and our subsequent response to it. Not all movies are going to be a perfect synopsis of the gospel story. In fact, most or none of them will be. There are echoes, though, riddled all throughout. Our obsession with sacrifice and nobility and redemption points to that most noble and redemptive sacrifice, that of our Lord and Savior. This is, I think, extraordinarily valuable to us, and has gotten easier with each movie. Even as they seem farther from the story, picking up the echoes almost gets easier when you start looking. I have learned a new depth of value in looking to find the trail back to God that exists in all beauty. And I just thought
That's
this was a
amazing.
beautiful way. And just, for the listeners and people who watch this, I did not pay the student off to write this review there. These are,
Well, maybe you should. That was great.
Yeah, and how old would that? Do you know, like how, like what's the age?
this was a senior. This was a senior student, so 12th grade. So
Yeah, well, it's awesome just to see, because I think, and that really touches on it too. Like, it's not just about because I think sometimes we can think preparing as Christians, it's about preparing for this movie. Is this movie going to be safe? Is this movie going to be it's a very isolated experience of just how do I engage with the thing that is directly in front of me, and then I move on and it's gone. Where like I think what you're doing, what we try and do here with the collision too, is just like it's more a worldview shift. It's seeing everything through the lens of the gospel, and kind of how that truth is filtered out, and how that can stories or art or conversations or trends, like how all of that points us in a Godward direction, rather than just being so focused on in a more narrow individual sense. I don't know if some of you have any hearing about the just the classes or things that he's doing. I was going to say, as far as adjustments to make, I would offer my humble. I think everything he's doing is awesome. The one thing that I find still lacking is that he does, in fact, watch the theatrical versions of the Lord of the Rings.
Yes, Daniel, and both you and my wife are on the same page there in terms of the grief that I have. So like I also like out myself here. We own the Lord of the Rings at home, but it is not the correct version according to you or to her. Sorry to say. So not enough time in the semester to be able.
See, you say that, but I've heard you say that you have Lele as being the boss, having the top job. I feel like you have the power to cancel math or some of these other kids don't need science. What they need is the extended scenes of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Well, I just wonder, do you? And I don't know what all movies you guys typically watch. But do you ever go back to like some of the more classic, like you mentioned Casablanca as being a big influence on you, but Do you ever go back to some of those old ones or old? I could imagine, Hitchcock would have some interesting movies that I
Yeah,
think would still be approachable for kids, but it's sort of. And if you do go back to like classic films, do you get just the eye roll from the kids, or is there ever any interest in like, these new shiny movies are great and all, but what if we watched a black and white film? Like,
yeah, for
what's that like?
Yeah, I mean, I have not done a black and white film in my current school, and I did beforehand in my the first school where I piloted this class, and there was some notable resistance. But I think not all black and white movies are fantastic.
Right, right.
Like I think it's in how you choose it. But here, I'll just kind of give an example. Um, Last year when I started this gospel movies class, so this is the third year that I've been doing a film class. This is my second year currently. I'm doing this gospel and movies type class. But last year I showed Star Wars: A New Hope. So from the '70s classic.
I
Um,
feel like where this conversation is going is going to hurt me somewhere deep.
yes,
But
yes.
continue. Yeah.
Daniel, brace yourself.
Close your ears, Daniel.
If you need a shoulder to cry on, Samuel's shoulder's right there because I'm not there with you. But so I showed it both semesters last year, and I thought it was just a beautiful. Now the other thing about doing a film class is if you could, the proper way would be to watch the entire trilogy because like you kind of it's segmented and it's fractured in the sense like you're just giving like the first leg of the trilogies like Fellowship of the Ring when you joined us, but it was the feedback I got from that was while it was great at illustrating the hero's journey and there were great themes there that many of them either said it was so slow like take it out completely or at least do some of the newer ones, and as someone who grew up watching the original trilogy and the prequels I cannot in good conscience swap it out with the Rise of Skywalker or something like that. I couldn't. I should just quit at that point if I'm going to do that. But
I assume demerits or detention was issued to those poor students
we,
who
we
had
got
that
we
thought.
got very close to it. But balance of truth and grace. So maybe gave a
Yeah,
certain talking to, but then I just said, all right, now
Well,
now go
I
and
feel like
sit.
the words of the Apostle Paul are relevant. Of like, I was ready to give you guys meat, and you guys are still stuck on baby food.
yeah.
Like that.
Still drinking milk.
Yeah. That.
I mean, like even it was interesting. Like we watched Groundhog Day, which is just from the '90s, but you could tell that. I mean, it's the '90s. The start is a bit campy. The effects aren't, it's not as high quality. But um, despite all that, the way that I can encourage students to be able to say like, all right, maybe like you don't find Groundhog Day to be as funny and Bill Murray is funny, which to me is like, why wouldn't you? I mean,
Exactly.
what about Bob or like any of these other,
Oh,
classic?
classics. Now you're speaking my language.
But I mean, you know, but then to say like, okay, well, how often do you feel like Bob in Groundhog Day, where you just feel like you're just days like on a repeat? And I think most students do. Like they go to class, from class to class to class to class. The bell rings, they go, and the drudgery of all that. But then, how can you use that to make you more like Jesus? What can you learn from this movie, which it's a fictitious movie? Like that's not ever going to happen. But movies are great because it gives us lessons that we can then, kind of explore and learn, and we can apply it to our life without having to actually go through that. But it just creates this good framework to be able to have conversations. The same thing with Arrival or really any other film that I've chosen. So yeah, no, I definitely need to add some classic films there. But the from my old class, the ones that I did were Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Singing in the Rain, Court Jester, 12 Angry Men, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Sergeant York, and Casablanca. So a lot of good black and white classic films from the 30s,
Definitely.
50s,
I feel
60s.
like you should at the start of your class, you should just hold as a threat over them that if they act out the next movie is going to be a silent film, and
Yeah.
do a total power trip for
Man,
that.
I'm so glad I came on the podcast because like you're helping me with all my classroom discipline. Yeah.
Yeah, just ask us if you have any questions. How to maybe get a last question for you. Obviously, you're doing this equipping these conversations within like kind of the controlled environment of a school classroom, which is an amazing place to do that. Just sort of based on your own experience, like what would you maybe say to people that don't teach in a school or have that opportunity, the students there, but still want to engage with the people in their church or their family, their kids, or whoever it might be, like still want to enter in, like spark those conversations based on on movies and lead those into spiritual places. Like, have you learned anything, or just in your own experience that you've taken like outside of the classroom, that maybe like there's some principles that other Christians can apply?
Yeah, I mean, I shared one of the things. It's kind of like I shared two caveats. Well, I guess three, but for the purpose of this discussion, two with my students. I tell them, we're watching movies and they're made by humans, and since humans are made in God's image, human beings cannot help but reflect their creator in the things that they create, whether it's a book they write, something they sculpt, a movie that they make. They're reflecting something there, whether the image is distorted, whether they acknowledge the creator or not. So that's one sort of guardrail I give. The other thing I would say is that I try to repeat this, maybe a bit of a mantra for my students. Like any and every movie that tells a worthwhile and meaningful story has echoes of the greatest story ever told, and that's the gospel. So, if we are wanting to engage in gospel conversations with people, then it would sometimes it's just helpful. Like, I mean, Daniel, when you came and you shared with our class about Inside Out, you talked about how film provides a visual vocabulary for things that may be difficult or abstract to kind of grapple with. But I think like using film, if you have those sort of two parallel things in mind, then you can view films really as a springboard. It's not that anytime I sit down for a movie or a TV show, I'm always, all right, I'm gonna blog about this later, or oh, okay, I'm gonna, use this. Like there are some movies that, quite frankly, would not work for, an endeavor like this. There are some movies that just like, completely bankrupt of any redemptive elements or themes. But most of them, whether it's from an emphasis of the negative or it's showing it in a positive, could be used in some way, shape, or form for us to reach our neighbors, reach people in our churches. It could be a tool for discipleship, and it can be a tool to reach people who might not be interested in having a conversation otherwise about spiritual things or the gospel.
Yeah, and I know like the terminology we use here at the Collisions, like cultural conversations. Like I've always seen films as like a dialogue, a conversation, whether this the filmmaker sharing his own thought or just sort of almost like by proxy them discussing issues and kind of representing those things that are going on in society. And like you said, some conversations are really valuable. Some conversations are short and trivial, and you move on from them. Like not every movie. I mean, as someone that has to come up with spiritual themes in all my reviews, like the last movie I saw was Red One, the Christmas movie that is just coming out this weekend as of recording. Like I had to do a little bit of gymnastics to find some interesting, valuable insights from movies like that. But I do think but you can't find those good conversations unless you're involved in the dialogue, like, unless you're involved in listening to what's coming out. But speaking of things, I think definitely edifying conversations, probably more so than we've had on this show
ever,
or perhaps ever, is the next segment of this podcast. We have things we like that you should like too. And so because we have a guest, because we just don't like that many things, and we don't want to have to scrape even further down the barrel of European, Viking power metal, although there's still, the barrel is still, they got some drops in it, which you guys can stay tuned for next episode. But we thought we would give you the floor just to share anything with our listeners of this thing that you like, that you think they would do well to adopt and like as well.
Yep. No, yeah. Well, wow. What great power to be able to share something to such a
With
large.
great power comes great responsibility.
Yes. So the thing I'm not going to share is not Spider-Man. Though Spider-Man's great. It's not even if you're watching Captain America, though he's one of my favorite superheroes. Actually, the things we like that you should like too that I figured I'd share is actually not a thing, but a who, and it's the music, the writing, the ministry of the one and only Andrew Peterson. And so This may be a little bit controversial because we're not quite to Thanksgiving yet. I don't know what your dispositions are with regards to when Christmas music is appropriate to play or not. But Andrew Peterson's "Behold the Lamb of God" album it's become a tradition of our family, and it's just been something we look forward to every Advent season. And it's just so well written, and it just tells the story from like all of Scripture, beginning to end. And then my favorite fiction series is actually what Andrew Peterson wrote. It's called the Wingfeather Saga, which is actually more marketed towards children. But after I read through it, I just thought he just does such a beautiful job of telling just good stories. Because like I mean, sometimes the difficult thing as followers of Christ is like with faith-based film or things like that. Sometimes it's you're not really telling a good story, but it might be a Christian story, something that appeals to that audience. But like just like stories that are just like really good, not necessarily preachy, but they're just like true. They're like grounded. And one of my favorite quotes that Andrew Peterson says that really just like I love him so much for this, but and his ministry. But he says, if you want someone to hear the truth, you should tell them the truth. But if you want someone to love the truth, you should tell them a story. And I think that's why like I love, like he tells the story through his music. He tells the story through his writing. And his ministry with the Rabbit Room is all about a collection and a community of artists and storytellers working, collaborating, doing things to edify the body of Christ. So definitely would recommend anything that he's written lyrically, fiction, nonfiction. He has a great memoir that I've enjoyed on. He talks about creating and the endeavors of like someone who is like artistic and creating. It's called Adorning the Dark. Also a great, fantastic read as well.
We are definitely, I believe, we're both Peterson fanboys.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly second that recommendation for the things you like there.
Yeah, because the Wingfeather, that's fantastic. I actually, I think last year, because there's the show, they've made the adaptation on Angel Studios, and the Angel Studios had actually sent us like the first season or whatever to see if we would review it. So, and like I was familiar with it, but I hadn't seen it, I hadn't read the books. And like we started, I think, watched a couple episodes. Like, this is actually really good. And I got my kids the audiobooks, and they started listening to it, and I would like hear parts. And then I was like, well, I have the audiobook. Like, I should read I powered through those books. Like I was.
Yeah, I haven't yet, but they're good.
And just like you said, they're just like, they're sort of like, I mean, it's like C.S. Lewis. It's for younger viewers, but there's so much depth to that me and my kids are having these like deep theological conversations, and like I'm listening to it in my car and all like into what's going to happen next. Like my kids are also into it. Like they're just good stories. And I mean, the show is really good too. Just did the second. We reviewed the second season not long ago, trying to work the connection to try and at some point interview Andrew Peterson.
Yeah, I mean, well, hey, maybe my mentioning, we can, tag him in social media or something about that. I gave him a shout out. But like truly, like I finished reading the series, the entire series, like 4 books, wonderfully written. And I turned to my wife and I said, this is going to be required reading in the Diza household. And she was like, wow. And she was like, she read through it herself and she plowed through it just as well. And she was like, yeah, I agree. So anything that he's written, and then the struggle from that is once you experience something good, it's like, okay, well, what do you move on to next? So, I don't know. So
yeah, and in many ways, I think I said this in my review, like people always ask, like, who's the next C.S. Lewis? Who's the next J.R.R. Tolkien? And like personally, I think there isn't one. I think we peaked with those two. But for me, Andrew Peterson, like the Wingfeather Saga, that's as close as we've come to sort of that level of kind of fantasy, Christian, like infusing the gospel in a way that's not just hokey and preachy, like, but still has real depth to it. So again, we echo your thing that we like the thing that you like that we should like to. But if I were to do things that we like that you should like to on this episode, I too would do a person, and that would be Mr. Unix Diza for joining us on the show. Appreciate it. I know this is like you just finished being around kids all day, so like I'm sure you're in need of some coffee or something. You're exhausted. We appreciate you just coming on here. I was excited just to pick your brain on it because I think you have so much just insights for that. We'll probably try and drag you on at some point again, in the not too distant future. As far as this, like, I don't know if you have any, like, I know you have a blog and some play. Is there anywhere that if people want to like hear more or just connect with you or pepper you with hard questions too, like anywhere that they can find you or connect with you?
Yeah, so the blog, and I think we can include that in the show notes, the link to
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
I will say, I'll preface about the blog is writing has been a passion of mine on and off for, since I was growing up. But sometimes, when you're busy, work, family, kids, sometimes, so like, don't judge me when you go to my blog and the first thing that you see. I think the last time I wrote was like last April, so it's been a while. But my intention is to, as I have more bandwidth to be able to contribute there. But some of those are my musings. You can go there and subscribe. That way, anytime I put something out, you can, get an automatic email, which, you may choose to open or not. I don't know. But, and then also, if anyone wants to, learn more about the class that I'm doing, or maybe like, you're connected to a school that might be interested in doing something like this, we can even include, I'll give you like a good email address you can include and they can reach out. And I'm always about dialogue and collaboration, because like the mission is the same, right? With what you guys are doing, with what I'm trying to do. It's just you doing it in Georgia and I'm here in Ohio. So yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll include all those links. Curious, if anything that was shared, we talked about, like, jumps out to you, reach out and, have those conversations. Thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you, thanks for joining us for another episode. We hope you will see us next Thursday, every Thursday, for more conversations on faith and pop culture.